Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. My name is Paul Gehringer. I'm the Extension Legal Specialist here in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics at the University of Maryland. And today on the podcast, I'm going to do another interview, putting this out on a Friday instead of the normal Wednesday, just because I think the topic is timely as we look at some of the market impacts of COVID-19, not knowing the true market impacts probably until much further down the line, but trying to get a handle on what some of the impacts could be and why we're seeing these impacts that we're seeing, and why, if you're a consumer, you maybe see them at the grocery store. If you're a producer, you're seeing them, as somebody who's trying to market livestock or grain at this time of year. But today brought on Derrell Peel, who is a professor at Oklahoma State University. He's the livestock marketing specialist there. I had him when I was a student there, so went to many different conferences with him. So thought I'd have him on because he knows a lot about the cattle markets. So now I will turn it over to the interview that was recorded earlier this week. So take it away, Paul and Dr. Peel. Okay, so I'm going to have you go ahead and introduce yourself, Derrell.
All righty. Well, I'm Derrell Peel, Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist at Oklahoma State University.
So I had you come on the podcast today to tell us sort of what's going on in the cattle markets, because you seem like the best person to talk about this. So what's currently going on in the cattle markets, and why are they so crazy?
Boy, they are crazy. And of course, we're in completely uncharted waters in the whole economy, every aspect of our economy, and certainly ag markets and cattle markets. And really, there's a variety of things going on. I think it's hard for people to sort of sort out all of the impacts. If you go back to kind of when the shutdown started, the month of March and really the first week of April was kind of one set of impacts, and then we've transitioned into something different here more recently. We'll talk about in a minute maybe, but the shutdown, basically we have two major food service food channels in this country. So USDA data shows that total food expenditures, about 54% goes through food service away from home, and about 46% goes through at home or retail grocery. So you got two major channels, roughly equal size. And of course, what we did overnight by shutting all the restaurants down, or largely shutting them down, is we took that one channel and cut it from, half of the market down to, 10% of the market or something like that. That created enormous bottlenecks, logistical problems. And at the same time that was all happening, consumers, because of what was happening, went to the grocery store, and not only were they going to buy ground beef and steaks or whatever this week, but they bought extra because everybody wanted to stock up. So you had this surge in demand. At the same time, you had this bottleneck in getting product there. And the upshot was, of course, grocery store shelves have been empty a lot. Prices, at least wholesale prices, shot up dramatically for a brief period of time, came back down from that. So that was all going on for about a month or 5 weeks or so. And then we're still dealing with that because you don't fix those supply chains overnight. But we have made some adjustments, and just with a little more time, everybody kind of gets things figured out a little bit. So it wasn't quite as bad. In the last 2 weeks, what has hit now, of course, is that coronavirus has hit the country, basically rural areas, and so, which is where a lot of these processing facilities are located. And so now we've got major concerns about keeping packing plants open across the board. Beef, pork, and poultry are all having some issues with that. So now we have a situation where we simply don't have enough labor to process the animals. So we actually have it's a disruption in supply. It's not really a shortage yet, because I don't want, consumers still probably shouldn't be very worried about not having product. But definitely we have some disruptions going on, and it could turn into something much more serious if we wind up shutting a bunch of these plants down at once.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we've already had that in pork already in the past week. The major processor in South Dakota had to shut down because of too many COVID cases. And
yeah, that big pork plant, and several other smaller things. And so, the estimates are right now, and actually another plant went down, a pork plant, just in the last 24 hours or so. So they're estimating that about, I think, 11% of pork packing capacity is offline right now. Now, some of the other earlier shutdowns may come back online. Hopefully, you get it back down to 7 or 8%. Beef is probably in that same range right now. There's one major beef packing plant in Greeley, Colorado down. There's some smaller plants and a bunch of other plants that are still open but operating at reduced capacity. So the net effect is we probably have 7, 8%, something like that, of beef packing capacity also offline right now. And so, packers just simply can't process all the animals that are ready. So, that translates into less demand, whether it's fed cattle or hogs or whatever. We just can't process them. So prices obviously are reflected lower there. At the same time, we're seeing disruptions in the flow of product into markets. And so you're starting to see some spikes in wholesale prices that reflect that.
And with the sort of, as you talked about, the shift from us going out to eat and now having to eat at home or eat out less and have takeout brought to us, depending on what your eating habits are and how much you can afford the dining services that will deliver to you, or if they're available in your area.
Yeah, right.
How hard is it to move that product that was geared towards a restaurant over to consumers? Because I know in eggs, that took a while, and that's why we saw the spike in egg prices at one point. How hard is it for these packers to shift?
It really is very difficult. And in fact, we're still only able to do that to a limited degree. Part of it's at the packing plant level because the packers do produce some product directly for grocery stores, let's say. So they produce the case-ready product. Sometimes it's an additional further processing facility that does that. But the facilities that package stuff for retail grocery have completely different equipment and capabilities than, say, a further processor that does portion control steaks for restaurants. The food service side is all about bulk packaging. So the product gets shipped to a restaurant and they don't buy, 1 pound packages of bacon or 1 pound packages of hamburger meat. They get it in 10 or 15 pound boxes, bulk packed. And, those don't work at the grocery store. Grocery stores are not set up to repackage that because most grocery stores don't really do anything in the back room anymore. They don't have butchers. They don't have the labor to do any repackaging, even if they could. Plus, label requirements are different for institutional pack and retail pack. So there's just a lot of challenges. There's only a limited amount that you can shift over. And so, we're still dealing with that very much. And then, like I said, on top of that, now we're actually seeing some actual disruptions in product flow. So when the big plant went down in Sioux Falls, then there's a domino effect because that's a pork plant that supports further processing plants that do bacon and ham. And so those then in turn don't have any product coming to them. So those shut down. And so there's just a big domino effect. But the bottom line is those two supply chains, food service and retail grocery, are very, very specialized, and you just can't move between them very well at all. There's limited cases. And again, we're starting to do a bit more of that. I know, and, my wife is a couple of times now, the only egg she could find in the grocery store was a 5 dozen box in flats, and so that's what we have. But not everybody can handle that. And so, there's only a limited amount that you can do that way.
So you've had a lot of eggs for breakfast, is what you're telling me.
You can have some tremendous omelets, though, when you have that many eggs available.
I will admit, the one thing, my grocery store was out of eggs for a brief period, but they've had eggs, they've had milk, but I haven't seen toilet paper in months.
Is that right? I don't even want to know what that says about your lifestyle right now, but.
Well, I just walked down and I'm kind of like, is there ever going to be toilet paper? And that's always my first walk down the aisle, because I go to Costco and buy stuff in bulk because I live alone. And why wouldn't you buy it in bulk if you live alone?
So you have a 6-month supply of toilet paper.
At any given point when I run out, I always go buy it in bulk because it's just easier and I don't have to remember about it. But now I go in and I'm like, what's there?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the toilet paper situation is exactly the same. And so the toilet paper industry, and I don't know much about it, but I've heard this recently. I think they say only less than 40% of the toilet paper market is home consumption. the bulk of it is industrial, so it's institutions, schools, cafeteria, restaurants, whatever.
Yeah.
That's a completely different kind of product and packaging in most cases. So it's the same problem. They have the same issues. And if you ask them, are you switching to be able to do more for the grocery stores? And their answer is no, that's different equipment, different packaging, and so on. We're not going to do that to a great extent because we don't expect this to last all that long. By the time we get switched over, then it's going to come back the other way, which is exactly the problem that a food processor, a further processor on meat side would do. If they did go do a bunch of investment and changes to be able to switch from food service packaging to retail grocery packing, then when we open food service back up, you go right back in there, it's probably going to be underutilized. It just doesn't make sense for them to necessarily invest a great deal in making that switch, as long as we don't expect this to go on indefinitely.
Yeah, because the whole time, at least at the Costco I go to and the Sam's Club I go to, you can buy toilet paper, but it's for industry. It's to go in one of the big dispensers, and it's like,
yeah, right. So you got those giant rolls.
Yeah. So if you get desperate enough, there's toilet paper available. It's just, it may be like you buying a flat of eggs. It may not be the form you want, but there are eggs available. There's toilet paper and meats. You may go in there and buy 50 pounds of hamburger meat. You may have only wanted 10.
Yeah. But it's the same thing. Now, I have heard a little bit, and I think this is very minor in terms of addressing the problem, but I have heard of some restaurants that are basically just selling groceries because they can still get product through their food service lines, and they have to repackage it. And it's going to depend on, I'm sure, on the circumstances in terms of what they can legally do, how they can legally sell it, and how it's labeled and all of that. But it is happening, at least to some extent.
I've seen that. I've gotten ads
where they're trying to address that problem.
Yeah, I've gotten emails where I can get I won't name the restaurants, but there are chains where, like not fast casual, but more casual dining places where you can buy milk from them, eggs.
Yeah, exactly.
Steak, low cut steaks, not high quality steaks.
Yeah. So, again, that's one way to try to address it. I think that's a very minor component, but it illustrates the challenge that we have pretty well. So
the other reason I asked you to come on is you recently helped put together a report for National Cattlemen's Beef Association, kind of talking about what all this means for the beef industry as a whole. So kind of what are some of the losses we're looking at mainly that you're estimating? Because I guess at this point we're just estimating, we're not really.
Well, yeah, obviously we're in the middle of things. And of course, the motivation for this study was the fact that out of the CARES Act, there is a chunk of money that's going to be distributed amongst some agricultural industries. And as USDA requested input from various affected sectors on sort of what their damages were. And so that's what we were asked to do on this project, was just to estimate for the beef industry. And of course, the beef industry is quite complex compared to some industries. We've got multiple production sectors. So not only did we make estimates to come up with a total number on what the industry damages were, but also then to break it down by the major sectors of cow-calf, stocker, backgrounding sector, and the feedlot sector. So, and again, to your point, we did this in early April, which is in the middle of the storm. It's kind of like trying to assess hurricane damage while the hurricane's still going on. It's really, so there's two things. One is a lot of stuff, you use what information you have available at that point in time in terms of where price levels were, where futures markets were, whatever. But you also recognize that, there's probably more damage coming, and that'll be a separate question for somebody at some point in time. So, but recognizing all of that, we did, I worked with a committee that was really national in nature, some ag economists and industry analysts from across the country. We did a lot of work in about 5 days' time, which was pretty intense. And honestly, it's not something I necessarily want to do very often. That is to say, ever, maybe. I've been asked if I would do the second part if it comes to that, and my answer is I hope not. But
aren't there young faculty members that need their name on something that want to work that hard?
Well, I recruited some of them to help me with this for good reason, but nevertheless, they wanted an old dog, I guess, to kind of lead this effort. So we got it done, and I think we did some good work. We had people that came in. Obviously, we didn't have time for a lot of new research or terribly sophisticated things in one sense, and yet we brought a tremendous amount of experience with the industry together. a lot of people had tools that they had available that they used regularly. We kind of combined all those, and it was a great team effort, and so on. So the upshot of it was, when we got done, we estimated damages for the cow-calf sector, the stocker backgrounding sector, and the feedlot sector. 2020 damages, really revenue losses is the focus here. And then in the case of the cow-calf industry, we also recognize that it's a long-term industry. Those cows are a productive asset for a number of years. So there was a second component there that recognized what the long-term implications were for the cow-calf industry if you don't fix the damages that are occurring this year. So the upshot of all of that was about $13.6 billion in estimated damages to this industry, which is a sort of scarily large number in some sense. It got to be a little bigger than I thought it would be, although I knew it would be a pretty big number going into it. But it's a big industry. You know, we started this year with 94 plus million head of cattle in this country, and over 80 million of them are directly involved in beef production. So when you account for all of that, it's a big number.
Yeah. When I read it, I was kind of shocked, but I was like, it makes sense when you look at the industry as a whole. It's got to be, because there's going to be long-term impacts, especially with cow-calf and probably stocker.
Yeah.
Just
the thing about I mean, the main point we tried to illustrate, and maybe illustrate is the right word, because again, obviously there's a million assumptions in all of these estimates, because again, we were sort of doing it in the middle of things, but that's why the world has economists, right? We're willing to make assumptions. So, you know,
somebody's got
to make assumptions. So we made assumptions, and again, it was a good group and a lot of experience and wisdom there. So I trust those a lot. But you know, in the case of the cow-calf sector, we really wanted to somehow demonstrate to everybody that it is a long-term industry. Stocker and feedlot production is a margin business. And so, you know, and really over the long haul in those two industries, they really don't care whether cattle prices are high or low on average, because it's all about buy and sell margins. And you've got production costs in between, but it's really about that buy-sell margin. And so, so really what the damage is to those two sectors is getting caught in the turning points. So when the market was up here and you had expectations for it being at a certain level, and then you have all this impact from you know, COVID-19, you get caught on one set of cattle. But then the next time you move those stockers out as a stocker producer, or you move those cattle out of the feedlot as a feedlot producer, the next set of cattle, if you come in that new world, you buy cattle cheaper, and the next set doesn't necessarily experience those losses once you adjust those margins. So it's more of a one-time impact. With cow-calf production, that cow's going to be around for a number of years, and if she loses value of production this year, not only do you have those losses this year, but you've affected her value permanently. And so we tried to account for that and said, and it really just stems from, if you have damages this year, that cow's not worth as much going forward unless those damages are compensated. So if you fix this year's damages, you also fix those future losses in value, but they need to be recognized, and so that's why we put that piece into the report.
So as we hopefully at some point move out of this, shutdowns and not being allowed to go anywhere and not being allowed to eat out, and we kind of move back, how do you see the cattle market either bouncing back, or, you know, are there more long-term implications because of COVID-19? And
well, I think the real answer to that is going to be, you know, really the macroeconomy. I mean, we are pretty clearly in a recession in this country. We won't officially pronounce that for some time to come, but I think there's little doubt that we are in a recession, and really it's a global recession. Yeah. I think.
Packers are moving to that, aren't they, in the cuts that they're doing and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the international is a piece of this whole issue, before, during, and after in some sense. But I think the real question of the long-term implications for the cattle industry really relates to what kind of a recession are we in when we get the human health issues under control at some point, whenever that is, hopefully before too terribly long. Then we're going to be in and it's a question then of just, you know, what kind of recession, how long is it going to take for that recovery I'm pretty sure the economic recovery is going to take substantially longer than the health recovery. And I say that not knowing when we're actually going to start recovering from the health side. I don't think we're quite there yet, even though we're pretty impatient to get things open back up. But nevertheless, the general economy obviously has had some enormous shocks. And so the longer term, when you think about, and part of it is just recovery in general. When will people get hired back and employment goes back down and people have money to go eat out and things like that? The other part of it is to sort of speculate on what kinds of permanent changes we may have made in our world. I'm not sure we're ever going to go back and, we probably go back to a world where we never have restaurant tables as close together. And so that reduces their capacity, that reduces their turnover, which is going to change their overall economics. Some of that stuff's going to take many months probably to shake out in terms of what it means long term for that industry. Business travel, we've all learned how to do Zoom meetings now, for better or worse. And
I see fewer conferences in our future.
I do too. I think, a lot of routine business travel that happened in the past probably just won't happen as much anymore because we're learning that we don't have to do that. Now, I don't know about the convention industry. I worry about, or I think about a little bit, maybe I don't worry, but I think about Las Vegas and places like that count on a tremendous amount of convention business. It may be that, I'm just purely speculating here, but I could see businesses sort of cutting out a lot of the more routine kind of travel, doing that distance-wise, like we're learning to do now, and then maybe having one big convention a year where you get together or something. I don't know. I just think we're going to see some long-term impacts. It's been interesting to think about beef demand through this process because, as I mentioned earlier, in March, when we first shut things down, we had this surge of grocery demand and we had the bottlenecks of getting product to grocery. And then as we go forward here, a couple things happen. One is, first of all, people get stocked up. So even if they're maintaining those stocks, they go back to buying in a little more routine week-to-week basis, potentially. And at some point in time, they probably get less concerned about our future. And so they probably draw down those stocks somewhat. Now, some people have gone out and bought freezers. That's another thing you can't find right now. You can't get toilet papers. You can't buy home freezers.
I hadn't thought about that.
But, oh no, you can't find them. I have a son that's been looking for one and he can't find one. But so maybe they maintain some of that on a more or less permanent basis. But I think a lot of cases, people that, got the freezer above the fridge really crammed right now are not going to want to maintain that indefinitely. So you could actually see grocery store demand actually lapse a little bit as people sort of draw down that inventory. Now, I think they're probably not doing it right now because they're still kind of concerned about the future, but at some point they'll probably get over that. So you could have that lapse in demand. And if that happens when the restaurants are still shut down, then you have sort of a lower demand. So we had this surge in demand first. You could have a period of kind of normal demand, at least on the grocery side, and then lower demand. And then when the restaurants come back on, over time, at least, you're going to rebuild that other half of the industry. So the upshot is it's hard to know the timing. It's impossible to know the timing, but there's a lot of choppiness in this process over time. And I think that's really the story about 2020 is just, we haven't changed our overall projections for beef production in 2020. The number of animals were out there. They're going to get processed later probably rather than sooner, given the disruptions we're seeing right now. But we haven't changed our overall estimates for 2020 being a record beef production year and a record pork production year. But we've sure done a lot to change the timing within the year. And that's where a lot of these short-term market dynamics are coming from.
Very interesting. Well, I guess we'll end there.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on. And
I'm happy to do it anytime.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Maryland Risk Management Education Podcast. I put Derrell's contact in the show notes, and the report we talked about that National Cattlemen's Beef Association had put together that he was a part of and led the effort on in the show notes as well. So you can get a copy of that if you're interested in it. So thank you again for listening. And if you have any questions or any thoughts on future episodes, please let me know at lgoering@umd.edu. Or you can tweet me at aglawpaul or find me on Instagram at the same handle. Thank you again for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.